Hello and welcome to the Climate Resilience Podcast, brought to you by JBA Consulting. I'm Phil Edmonton, and in this podcast series we unpick some of the complexities, the challenges and the opportunities on the topic of climate resilience with some inspirational thought leaders. Now, JBA's core values are share, innovate and be different. Innovation is part of our DNA. In the late 1990s, JBA were appointed by the Environment Agency to develop the first ever national flood map, termed the Indicative Floodplain, something we developed by creating our own pioneering modelling software. More recently, we've launched JBA Labs, our innovation accelerator programme, to support innovators right across the business, from scoping ideas right through to commercialisation. And so today, I'm delighted that we're dedicating a whole episode to explore the role and importance of innovation in creating resilient places, resilient assets, resilient systems and resilient organisations. And joining me are JBA's Nick Law and Richard Beardsley from Affinity Water. So welcome chaps to the podcast, and perhaps you'd like to start by introducing yourselves. Nick, let's come to you first.
Hi, Phil. Thank you very much. So I lead the commercial side of our innovation program here at JBA called JBA Labs, as you mentioned, started in 2022. And my background really has been helping industry manage the risks of weather and climate through the application of science and technology, including 10 years at the Met Office with a focus particularly on the energy and water sectors. So very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I think there's a lot of your experience that we're gonna talk about today. So delighted to have you, Nick. And Richard, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, Phil. My name's Richard Beardsley. I'm the Innovation Program Manager for Affinity Water. And I've been in the water industry for 35 years now. I suppose you could see the first part of my career was in water treatment, wastewater treatment, working for Severn Trent Water. I then spent the middle part of my career working in business improvement, change management, transformation. And that was across both Severn Trent Water and a short time in the One Alliance at Angling Water. And then the third part is really around innovation. And I've been working in this role for Affinity Water for just over 3 years now. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, welcome to the podcast, Richard. And so the obvious place to start then is what is innovation? What does it mean for JBA? What does it mean for Affinity Water? And ultimately, why should we innovate? Nick, I'll throw that open to you to start with.
Yeah, so why should we innovate? Well, the way I see it is we're in such a fast changing world. You have to innovate just to keep up, not even to get ahead, just to keep up, you have to innovate. So then to get ahead and to be leaders and create real meaningful change, you have to have a really strong and proactive innovation program. So it's core to what we do at JBA. As you said, we created the first flood map for England and Wales. And since then, we've continued to grow our efforts in innovation, particularly with this JBA Labs program. We have, I think since I joined in 2022 with JBA Labs, we've sponsored over 250 innovation projects, some of them small projects, some of them big, transformational projects in our work. So really central to JBA, and really a central part to the people and culture in JBA.
Mm-hmm. Great place to start. Thanks, Richard. I'll bring you in here. What does innovation mean for Affinity Water, and why do you innovate?
Yeah, so I think often when people think about innovation, they think about products, nice, shiny toys, technology. But for me, the other two parts of innovation, the processes and the people, are probably more important. In fact, for me, innovation is centered upon people. So I'm really passionate about innovation in terms of our processes and our people. If you think that in the next sort of 10 years, over 20% of the water industry people will be retiring. So we need to prepare our people for the future. We really need to think about improving our processes, supporting our priority services customers, and all these things are innovation. Innovation doesn't need to be disruptive or groundbreaking. For me and for Affinity, sometimes innovation is just about new. So we look all around stakeholders, customers, other water companies or other industries, our supply chain, and we try and work out what other people are doing. And then we just sometimes include what we're doing into what we do, because providing it's new for Affinity, for me, it's part of innovation.
I'll pick up a little sort of strand of what you said there, which is that innovation doesn't always need to be disruptive or transformative or big shiny products. Sometimes innovation is just nudging that frontier forward a little bit further. It is just taking what somebody else has already done and evolving it. So it's more of an evolution rather than coming up with something wholly transformative. Which I really like. I think it's a lovely part of the opening conversation. Nick, you were referencing 250 odd JBA Labs innovation projects. Clearly, within those, there would have been some which have been groundbreaking and flagship. But I would imagine a vast majority of those are these that evolve existing processes or tools or products. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say that it's not sometimes these innovations are kind of progressive. It's the majority, really.
Right.
I would say I've actually looked it up. Is there a kind of a recognized portion of how much innovation is transformational versus incremental? And you're typically it's kind of a 90-10 rule. 90% of innovation is kind of progressive, small changes to make things better. And actually, if you look around, we're surrounded by the classic one is your mobile phone. They've got massive innovation teams, but within that, okay, maybe the first mobile phone was the transformational one. Now it's all about incremental innovation. And so a large portion of it is incremental, and sometimes you come across the transformative innovation, and we're looking for that, and we're supporting that, the environment to create that transformation. But the majority of it is incremental progress, which is hugely important part of it.
So that being the case, then the vast majority of innovations are incremental, progressive. Richard, in Affinity Water, in the teams that you have an involvement with, how do you get folk to actually recognise then that they are innovating? Because I think sometimes the perception is innovation, as we said, is something transformative, it's shiny, it's new. But actually, more often than not, as Nick just said, actually more often than not, people are inherently creating something that is progressive and incremental. So how do you get folk to recognise that, hey, you're doing this perhaps on a day-to-day basis, but you might not always acknowledge and realise that it is innovation?
Yeah, it's a great point, and for me, it's all about building a culture of innovation, and that takes time, doesn't it? I think a combination of modesty and people just thinking it's part of the job. But we've got some fantastic people at Affinity. Like, the water industry is full of fantastic people doing some great things. But you're quite right. They don't always recognize it as innovation. So it's pointing that out to them. And one of the big changes we've made is we involve our people team, our HR specialists, in how we work with our people. We also use the communication team. So, for example, this afternoon, I'll be recording another podcast for internal use. We're talking to one of our HR managers exactly about these things, about how we build this culture of innovation, how we get people involved, how we get people to recognize that actually what you're doing is great and it is moving the needle forward. It doesn't always have to be disruptive, doesn't always have to be groundbreaking, but it's actually making a real difference.
And actually, I suppose there's a follow-on part to that conversation, which is actually innovation isn't just the tools and the processes and the services that are used on the front end. Actually, there's all sorts of different business departments and services that actually in and of themselves would benefit from and do benefit from moving that dial and making that progress. Richard, you mentioned a phrase there, the culture of innovation. I'd like us to look at cultural, organizational culture, I think, next. because innovation, by its nature, I think is risky or involves an element of risk. What you're doing is you're committing investment of time, personnel, resources, funding to the development of a system or tool or process that may not always achieve its desired outcome first time. And that's great because that's part of the learning. That's really important. We had that discussion about, well, why bother? And Nick pointed out very eloquently at the start that actually we need to innovate to stay in touch and stay in the game. And actually, if you want to get ahead, you need that strong innovation culture. So I think there's an interesting thing here about risk appetite within an organization, and having that strong leadership from directors and senior leaders to make that investment and to balance the risk. Of course, it's risk versus reward. So I suppose I'll come back to you on that then, Richard. What's the culture like in Affinity Water, and what's your perception of this sort of risk appetite?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky. We've got a great chief executive, Keith Haslett, who is really supportive of innovation. I'll be meeting him next week to talk about potential bids we've got for the Offwater Innovation Fund this time. He fully understands, been in the water industry a long time. He fully understands the risk profile. I mean, clearly we do everything we can to try and manage and mitigate the risks. And also we understand that if things are going wrong, we need to do course correction, or sometimes we need to stop the project altogether. And Keith fully understands that, but he also understands that without taking some calculated risks, we're never really going to get the progression that we could get. So it's really important that you do understand that innovation does carry perhaps a higher risk profile in terms of TRLs, technology readiness levels, and other aspects. But it's really important that we still do innovation work. And Keith fully gets that.
And Nick, bring you in here. Yeah.
This is a really fascinating area, and I think there's two parts to it. There's creating that culture where and the things that so people are involved in innovation. We to break it down. They need space and time to be creative. Creation happens when you're relaxed, and you're not your creative best when you're stressed or busy. You need space and time to create. You need a safe and supported environment if you're involved in innovation, so you feel comfortable pushing things forward. You need to be open to failure, and that's something that we're particularly working on, because it's kind of ironic. JBA is about helping industry and society mitigate risks of our changing weather and climate. So we're about reducing risk. So we're not naturally risk takers. So we do have to work hard to create this culture that actually it's okay to take risks and to fail. So that's a really big part of it, is creating that culture. And the other really important thing that we prioritize as a labs team is communication, because you've got to really reach across all of the organization. There's so many different people involved. I found you kind of have these groups of people that are really confident in innovating, and they're the ones that naturally step up. But actually, innovation crosses all areas of the company. You need your visionaries, but you also need the administrators. You need project managers. You need connectors and networkers. You need problem solvers. You need adopters. So you've really got to get into all of those areas. And from a lab's perspective, we've got two main, we've got lots of different communication channels with webinars and posts on the intranet and things like that. But we also try and reach people directly through what we call roadshows, where we go out to the offices and spend face-to-face time with people, talking about innovation, getting them comfortable, talking about taking risks, and telling them about the sort of network we're creating for them. And then we also have something called open mic, where people can phone in on a one-to-one basis without being in front of people and just, launch a crazy blue sky idea or ask questions about innovation, just to help them get that confidence and get things moving. So yeah, really, really big part of our overall effort as a as a labs innovation team.
And if I may say, Nick, as a recipient, really impressive as well. And it's always been great to work with you guys. And I think the processes that you just described there in terms of, well, how do you get into all those different parts of the business? How do you get in touch with the innovators, the blue sky thinkers, the creators, but also the project managers? Or how do you get this, which is part of our DNA, as I said at the start, it's one of our core values. How do you build that without that culture with our new starters
Yeah,
and graduates and apprentices? You know,
exactly. It's very hands-on. It's very intensive. You need to keep pushing. You can't do it and then back off and expect everyone to just suddenly be, running away with innovation. It's a continual process, but it's actually the most fun part of it. Meeting people, talking to people, getting inspiration from people, and hopefully inspiring people. It's for me, it's the most fun part of the whole process.
Yeah, yeah, and that culture around inverted commas failure is an interesting one, because cards on the table here. I developed a tool in JBA about 18 months ago, which we had very high hopes for, and we wanted to really embed at a project level, actually, on all projects in JBA, and the concept was great. We did a bit of piloting, did a little bit of testing, rolled it out, and it just didn't quite have the resonance and the impact that we thought it would. So that's cool. We've gone back to the drawing board because the concept is right. It's in the application. So we're now rescoping, we're reworking that. We've taken the learning, and that sort of that feeling you have of where you go, oh, that's not quite hit the mark, actually, but we're getting some feedback. There is a little bit of a low there, a low moment there where you think, oh, is this the right thing to pursue? Should we put more time to it? Actually, that's a really important part, because it'd be easy to walk away. But actually, if you know if the concept is right and there's a really important need for the business, then you take the learning and you go back and rescope.
So can I just add?
Yeah.
Last week I was at the Institute of Water annual conference, and the first few sessions were around innovation, and one of the water companies' innovation managers, I can't remember which one it was, Richard, but they actually have an award for their innovation awards, and they reward people for stepping up and being a part of it and delivering. But they also have a specific award for failure in innovation, where they celebrate an innovation that's failed and take the learning from it and turn it into a really positive thing. And I thought that was brilliant, having that specific recognition that you've done something good by failing. I think that's brilliant. So we're going to look at how we can adopt that into our processes.
Final part of the podcast then, and I want to dedicate a little bit of time to this, really, is Affinity Water, JBA, have a number of tools, case studies, projects, where those innovation processes that we've been talking about have brought something to the fore. It has created a flagship product or a flagship service. So let's talk about some of those successes. Richard, let's start with you.
What, in terms of the JSat platform, Phil, was that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Start with that one.
Well, I mean, I can cover that. Or if you've got other things that we don't know of in Affinity, what's been your kind of big innovation?
Yeah. Let me start then with one of the big Affinity ones. We've got a project, Ofwat Innovation Fund project, called Water Neutrality at nav sites, which has been a really great learning experience for us. And what it's basically doing is looking at the issue of demand management. So the water industry in the UK has high water demand, as you will appreciate, and it's trying to understand the levers that manage that dictate that high demand. Is it behavioral, or is it technology? Why is the demand so high? What can you do to reduce the demand is really the thinking behind it. So the project that we're working on looks at behavioral changes, trying to influence customer behaviors. It then looks at technology like water reduction, technology in the house, low usage toilets, low usage sinks, etc. And then it looks at the combination of both. Is the right thing to do to put all your efforts into managing behaviours? Is it defining technologies that use little water? Or is it a combination of both? And that's been really interesting because for me, it blends the products, the people, the process that we talked about earlier. So that's a really exciting thing that Affinity are still doing. And also we're working on something called Support for All, which is around the Priority Services Register. And that's something I'm particularly passionate about. It's reaching customers who may struggle for whatever reason to interact with Affinity using the conventional channels. So it might be they've got sight issues or hearing issues or neurodiversity issues, but whatever it is trying to understand how we can better support those communities. So for me, that's the exciting bit. Moving to the JSat platform, I don't know if you want to start talking about that, Nick, and I'll perhaps
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But first, if you know anything about the behavioural activities of the shower, I would be keen to learn that, because time when my kids have showers, time stands still, and I failed to influence that on any level. But with JSat, yeah. So we've got two in our innovation program at the moment. We've got two flagship innovations, which have got external applications specifically built. So the first one I'll talk about is Resilient Studio, and this is incredible, and I think it's going to be transformational with regards to climate change adaptation. It's a technology that supports integrated catchment and coastal management, and it helps plan adaptation pathways for climate change, considering a range of resilience measures, and allows you to interactively evaluate the impacts and trade-offs of different adaptation strategies, and ultimately helps optimize very large-scale investments from water companies or councils or governments, things like that. It's quite a hard thing to describe without seeing it, but it's a really fantastic software that's probably at the technology readiness level 7 in kind of demo stage, and there's nothing like it out there. So that's really exciting stuff. Another one which Affinity know very well, because we've developed it in collaboration with them, is this JSat platform you mentioned, and this is also a first. And this is a remote sensing tool that uses satellite images and machine learning to automatically detect changes in catchments that might pose a risk to drinking water quality. And through a web GIS platform, it alerts catchment managers to these emerging changes so that they can be much more proactive in mitigating these potential risks. So, and that is transformational from a water company perspective, because catchment managers might have, insight into what's happening in a catchment every few years. They're trying to manage potentially hundreds of thousands of hectares. This changes it into, you can have some form of insight into catchment activities on a weekly basis. So that is really transformational, and that's something that I've been very involved in the last couple of years, and that's now thanks to the great work with Affinity Water, the JBA. That's now being adopted across the UK water sector. But again, there's a whole future set of innovations to come from that platform, which is equally as exciting.
Richard, did you have any comments on JSat in particular?
Yeah, I took it to our innovation steering group to review last week, and they were really impressed by it, Phil. They thought it was a really good idea. And I'm also discussing it with our chief executive and chief finance officer on Tuesday next week, the 30th. And hopefully it'll be positive news from that meeting as well.
This is for the next generation. So collaborative, we created this functioning tool. Now we're looking ahead through the Ofwat innovation program. What's the next series of innovations we can bring into the platform to address really tough issues in catchment management, like PFAS, and transport of pollutants and storage of hazardous materials, things like that. So it's going to be a really really interesting area to work on, and I expect some parts of that are going to fail, but we're going to push ahead and see what we can come out with.
Fantastic. Well, hope, fingers crossed for the future development then of JSat. Look, thanks for a great discussion, chaps. We've covered a lot there in quite a short amount of time, and going back to the start, Nick, you sort of said, why we need to innovate is because the world is changing around us, and we need to innovate to stay in touch, let alone get ahead. And we've touched on risk culture, we've touched on products and people and processes, and I think what's evident is that if we're to build whole society resilience to climate change, and if we're to create resilient places and resilient people, resilient assets, resilient landscapes and resilient organizations, then we need new ways of working. We need new tools and processes. We need to increment, and we need to provide the space for creativity and the willingness to learn. So yeah, thank you for a great contribution and conversation today. It's been really enjoyable. So thank you for listening to us today. We've reached the end of our time. As always, if you've enjoyed listening, then please hit the subscribe button so you're ready for the next episode in a few weeks' time. Till then, thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Edmondson, and you've been listening to the Climate Resilience Podcast, brought to you by JBA Consulting.